If you're thinking about starting a YouTube channel this year, or you want to start your career in video production, and you're looking for your first camera body that is capable of shooting high-end images, this could be the one. The Sony a6700 is one of, if not the strongest options on the market in its class. In terms of value to dollars, it's really hard to beat this. And if I was starting fresh right now and I wanted to do a mix of YouTube content, professional video, and photography, this is absolutely what I would spend my money on. I obviously haven't owned this camera for a long period of time and can't declare if it's reliable after many years of use, but I have owned several Sony cameras in my career and all of them were relentlessly reliable. I've never had any issues with them and I have no reason to think otherwise for the a6700. One thing that I have caught wind of is some users experiencing overheating, especially in 120 FPS. I actually couldn't get this camera to overheat in anything but 120 FPS, so if you're shooting your long takes in 4K 24, put the heat threshold on high, and you should be good. If you're shooting long takes in 120 FPS, Godspeed. There's also autofocus to think about. If you're more of a traditional filmmaker, chances are you don't really care about this, but if you're a solo filmmaker trying to make content, autofocus is huge. To no one's surprise, the a6700 has amazing continuous video autofocus. If you ask me, Sony currently has the best autofocus in the industry, and the Sony a6700 includes it with all of its glory. You can set up your camera and trust it, and it will stay locked on 9 times out of 10. Although in my experience so far, it's basically been 10 out of 10. You can go into the settings and dial in how responsive and quick you want the autofocus system to behave too, which is awesome. I like to make it very responsive, but rack focus slowly, which it does an amazing job at. That way it looks more like someone is actually smoothly racking focus instead of the usual slam focusing of lesser autofocus systems. There's also eye autofocus to ensure the camera is keeping with your subject's actual eye hole instead of a general box. You can also actually tap an object to track it with autofocus, which is super cool. It's nice to be able to take your camera out and not worry about switching the battery every half hour. The a6700 does use Sony's bigger NPF-Z battery, which will give you something like 2 hours of constant 4K 24 FPS. That is certainly over my threshold for being considered good battery life. These batteries aren't that expensive either, so picking up a couple extra isn't a big deal. If you're recording long takes and you need even longer than 2 hours, Sony included a USB-C port that supports power delivery. And that just basically means that you can charge the camera while in use, and not only from a wall charger, but also from anything that delivers power through USB-C, like a regular old power bank. The a6700 does have an IBIS system. Holding the camera still, it does a great job, and panning works smoothly too. If you want stronger stabilization, there's also a boost mode that crops 1.1 times in order to stabilize a little bit more. All of this works at the sensor level, which is gated by Sony's E-mount system. There's a whole bunch of lens mounts these days, but if I had to pick one, I think Sony's is the best. The flange distance is short, so you can adapt almost any DSLR or vintage lens. The difference between Sony and everyone else is the selection. E-mount is one of the oldest, so naturally, there are the most lenses available. You could go with something in Sony's absolutely massive and excellent native lens selection, or you could go with a third-party lens from the likes of companies like Sigma or Tamron. Right now I'm going with an absolute classic for budget filmmaking, which is the Sigma 30mm f1.4 Contemporary, but there are other options available for any budget. One thing to note is the a6700 does not have internal ND filters. Not a huge deal, there are a lot of good quality options these days. My favorite budget filter is Earth's variable ND. Just make sure that you buy the right size. It should match the front filter thread on your lens. Recording yourself is hard to do when you can't see anything. It's possible, but it's not fun. So having a monitor that can fully swivel out is really nice. Luckily, this is the first camera from the a6000 line that has a fully articulating touchscreen, so you shouldn't have any trouble no matter what angle you need to shoot at. There's also a rangefinder style viewfinder on the back of the camera in case you need to get a closer look or if it's too bright to see the screen. If you need to attach a microphone, there is a 3.5mm mic jack as well as a 3.5mm headphone jack. In case you're wondering, nearby there's also that USB-C port, a micro HDMI, and a single card slot, which takes SD cards. This is how I would set up this camera if you've never really operated a camera before and you just want to keep it as simple as possible. First of all, this dial on top changes the amount of control that you have over the exposure settings, that being ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. You should learn how to manipulate these as fast as possible, but in the very beginning, you can go ahead and keep it on A, which is fully auto. It'll take care of everything for you. Make sure that this dial below it is set to video. And then the next thing that we're going to want to do is go to this FN button here. This is your function menu. Hit the picture profile, which should be the first icon. And right now it's set to off. Scroll all the way down to PP11, which is picture profile 11, and that will give you the color and gamma mode of S-Cinetone, which I think has improved color science. The next thing we want to do is go to menu, go down to the shooting menu, image quality and recording, hit file format. And if you're shooting just regular content, a6700 4K is fine. And we can go to movie settings, set your record frame rate to 24 frames per second. This is if you're shooting sort of more filmic looking content. If you're wanting to shoot slow motion, you can go to 60 or 120 and then hit the record setting. At the very beginning, you don't need all of the data, so we can just accept a smaller file size and do 60 megabits per second, 420, 8-bit. And really, that's it. Put a card on the camera, press record, focus on composition, and you're off to the races. If you're a little bit more of a seasoned filmmaker, this is what I would change. If you want to go to file format and go to a6700 and get all intro, you can totally do that. I'm just going to keep it off for now. Then we can go to movie settings, bump it all the way up to 100 megabits, 422, 10-bit, of course. And then let's go down to log shooting settings and turn on flexible ISO and make sure S-Gamut 3.cine is on, which is S-Log3. And you can choose if you want to embed the LUT file in here. You can totally come in here to the operation customize and change what every single button on the camera does. I'll run through mine for fun really quick. C2 up here on top is focus magnifier. When I'm shooting, my thumb rests up here so I can press record, change any of the settings, turn the camera off and on, and then I can also check focus really quick like that. Up on the D-pad, it's still on display. Right is still ISO, although I do have this back dial on ISO. This dial right here changes the aperture. The one where your pointer finger is gonna do shutter. I have down set to mic level, so I can change that really quick. And I have left set to white balance. I also have delete set to LUT toggle. I usually turn all of the touchscreen controls off. If you're the kind of person that's touching to focus all the time, this is probably super useful. For me, it's just me accidentally touching the touchscreen all the time with my nose and messing stuff up, so I completely turn it off. You could deep dive through this menu for hours and find all kinds of cool things to customize, but for now, in the simplest terms, this is how I would set up the a6700 for filmmaking. When it comes to image quality, the spec sheet is an impressive one. There's 4K up to 120 FPS, with the 24 and 60 FPS options being downsampled from 6K, all at 10-bit 422. The dynamic range of this sensor isn't the best in class, but decent enough. Sony D reports around 14.5 stops total and around 11 stops of clean dynamic range. I'll link to their charts below. They also found the rolling shutter performance to be about 16 milliseconds in 4K 24, which isn't world class, but you shouldn't have any issues either. Last but certainly not least is the most subjective aspect of image quality, which is color science. Every single filmmaker has a different opinion on this, which is cool. That's part of what makes up your personal style. If you ask me, the colors are awesome. I think we are past the days when certain camera manufacturers had a massive edge with color science over others. You should be able to pick up almost any modern mirrorless camera and get a natural looking image out of it. Sony's internal color science is good. After a bit of adjustment, it's great. And with some love and patience, an S-Log3 image can look absolutely fantastic. Since this is the same sensor as the FX30, we know that the a6700 also has two native ISOs, one at 800 and one at 2500. This is always helpful if you're low on available light and you need to bump up to 2500 for extra light sensitivity without introducing a whole bunch of extra noise. Noise pattern itself is fine, not particularly granular or workable, but fine. My least favorite thing about Sony mirrorless cameras is the internal noise reduction. You can't turn it off. It does lower the noise floor a bit, but it also makes it look a little bit blotchier. Luckily, the noise floor is low enough, in most cases you won't see it at all. Let's run through a couple shots that were recorded with the a6700 in S-Log3, and we can do a little bit of a grading demo here. All right, so here's your boy. Let's go ahead and throw on a color space transform. Like I said, it is S-Log3, so we'll go S-Gamut 3.cine. And we'll go S-Log3. You'll find it pretty common these days when shooting with digital sensors to overexpose, especially with Sony sensors. A lot of people like to expose over about a stop, maybe even a stop and a half. This is maybe a half stop overexposed. So I would probably go to my waveform and make sure that we're on Luma. I'll turn off colorize so we can really see what's going on. Maybe we push it around until we get something a little bit more like that. I like that. And then we can go ahead and zoom in and look at skin tone here. Let's open our vector scope. This is either perfectly white balanced or very, very, very close. I actually like Sony skin tones. They look a little bit less rosy than like a Canon skin tone, but they're a little bit more rosy than a Blackmagic. Blackmagic leans a little bit more towards like a brown maybe, and Canon leans a little bit more towards like a pinky kind of red a lot of times. Sony is sort of in between. You're left with this healthy looking skin tone. My flannel right here is a really challenging color for sensors to get, and it absolutely nailed it. It's like a dark green with a tiny bit of blue in it. It did a really good job there. There just isn't a lot of noise to be seen. Granted, we have a lot of light hitting the sensor here, but we'll do a low light one in a second. I think this is a really good performance, especially for the price point. If we go to our next shot, I go back and I'll copy that grade and just paste it onto this one. And then we can just rework our primaries in order to make it fit. Prioritize for smooth shadows here. You can see some chromatic aberration from our lens because we have it wide open. This is recording at 3200 ISO, so we're getting up there and we're in the second circuit. Maybe we'll go over here. This is the night sky. There's absolutely no light up here. And this noise is not bad. Actually, versus my FX3, I think this looks even a little bit less denoised and a little bit more granular. This is in the second circuit, like I said. The second circuit for the FX3, which is 12,800, shadows can get a little bit muddy. And I think this looks really good, actually. You can tell that there's a little bit of noise reduction here. Definitely some chroma noise reduction. But what we're left with is not distracting. And with Sony footage, I'm usually going to come in here and go to 0.52 on a little bit of blurring, and then maybe even go back to primaries and come back to mid detail until we're like, I don't know, -20, and then I'll kind of ease that in. But I just wanted to show, if you're going to do some unsharpening there, that'll also sort of smooth over that. That is just amazing. I can't believe that the shot is as clean as it is. Here's a third shot during the day. And again, we can just copy that grade over, sort of push some things around. Yeah, that green is beautiful. It really captures that deep kind of forest hunter green that's really, really challenging for sensors a lot of times. Sony cameras in the past have pushed it a little bit more towards yellow. You really want, if you have this is an evergreen tree, you really want that green color to be able to pop through, and it's not easy. A lot of times I'll have to come into hue versus hue, and I'm grabbing like a yellow and pushing it a little bit more towards green. But here I don't have to do that. So like almost every Sony camera before it, I would overexpose a half stop, a stop, maybe even a stop and a half, but only if you're not gonna clip your highlights. If you're able to protect that, then you can overexpose. Highlight retention is awesome. The noise floor is super low. This is a really versatile image that gives you all kinds of headroom. Everything gets more impressive when you consider the price. $1,400 USD, fresh off the shelves, and down closer to $1,250 open box. I bought an a6500 back in the day for the same price when it came out, and it is shocking how much better the a6700 is. Massively improved image quality, battery life, autofocus, IBIS, and usability all around. I want to hear your guys' experiences with the Sony a6700. Leave your thoughts and questions below, but more than anything, thanks for watching. I really do appreciate you guys. I'll see you next time.